The autumn sun blazed fierce and unforgiving over Dry Creek as Penelope Ellis stormed down the dusty Main Street, her hands clenched into fists and her honey-brown hair escaping the tight bun she'd pinned it in that morning. The whispers followed her like shadows, townspeople ducking their heads and pretending they weren't staring at the woman who just publicly declared she would save her father's ranch alone. "Foolish girl," she heard someone mutter. "Ellis land will be Harrington's by winter." Penelope ignored them, keeping her spine straight as a rail. It was 1878, and in this corner of Wyoming territory, a woman running a cattle operation wasn't just unusual, it was considered impossible. But her father had no sons, only her, and with his passing 3 days prior, the responsibility had fallen squarely on her shoulders. 22 years old and already facing the fight of her life. The mercantile bell jingled as she pushed through the door, the familiar smell of coffee, leather, and dry goods greeting her. Mr. Porter, the proprietor, glanced up from his ledger and offered a sympathetic smile. "Miss Ellis, my condolences about your father." "Thank you," she said, placing her list on the counter. "I need these supplies. I'll pay what I can now and the rest after we drive the herd to Cheyenne." Porter's bushy eyebrows rose as he scanned the list. These are ranching supplies, Miss Ellis." "I'm aware, Mr. Porter." "I intend to continue my father's business." He cleared his throat, eyes darting to the window where several men had gathered, watching. "With all due respect, perhaps you should consider Mr. Harrington's offer. A woman alone, I'm not alone," she cut in, though it wasn't entirely true. The ranch hands had begun drifting away the moment her father fell ill. "And I don't intend to sell to a man who's been trying to steal our water rights for 5 years. Miss Ellis, you can't possibly manage my supplies, please." Her voice was steel, though her heart hammered in her chest. As Porter reluctantly began gathering her items, the mercantile door swung open. The sudden silence told Penelope who had entered before she turned to look. Gerald Harrington, the wealthiest rancher in the territory, removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Miss Ellis, I was hoping to catch you." "Perhaps you've reconsidered my proposition." "My answer remains the same, Mr. Harrington." She kept her gaze level with his, though he towered over her. "Be reasonable." His voice dropped, meant for her ears alone. "Your father's debts are substantial. The bank won't hesitate to foreclose. My offer is generous, considering the circumstances. The circumstances being that you've blocked our cattle from the North Pasture water, forcing us to take on those debts in the first place." She smiled tightly. "I'll drive the herd to market myself if I have to. The Ellis Ranch is not for sale." Harrington's congenial mask slipped momentarily. "A woman can't run a cattle operation. You'll be ruined within a month." "Then you can make your offer again in a month." Penelope turned back to the counter. "My supplies, Mr. Porter, today, if you please." She felt rather than saw Harrington leave, the mercantile door slamming behind him. Porter's disapproval radiated as he packaged her items, but Penelope kept her head high. She'd grown up on horseback, helped her father with the accounts since she was 12, and knew every inch of their 5,000 acres. If will and knowledge were enough, she could succeed. What she needed were handsmen who would work for a woman boss. The answer arrived 3 days later in the unlikely form of a trail-worn stranger. Penelope was struggling to mend a section of fence alone, her hands blistered and bleeding, when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her reach for the rifle propped against a nearby post. The rider came slowly, hands visible on the reins of a magnificent blood-bay stallion. He was tall, lean as rawhide, with dark hair curling from beneath his dusty hat. His face, tanned by years under the open sky, held intelligent eyes that assessed her standing there with the rifle. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "I mean no trouble. This is private property," she replied, not lowering the weapon. "I gathered." His voice had a slight drawl, suggesting Texas origins. "Name's Vincent Valero. Folks call me Val. I heard in town you might be hiring." Penelope's suspicion didn't waver. "Did Harrington send you?" The man Val looked genuinely puzzled. "Don't know any Harrington. Just rode in from Colorado yesterday. Been working cattle most of my life, and I need a job." She studied him, noting the well-worn but quality gear, the way he sat his horse like he'd been born to it, and the careful respect in his eyes. not pity or condescension, which made a refreshing change. "I can't pay much," she said finally. "Not until after the drive. Room, board, and a fair wage after the cattle sell is all I ask." He dismounted with easy grace, standing a respectful distance away. "I'm a fair hand with cattle, horses, and fixing what needs fixing." "Most men wouldn't work for a woman," Penelope said bluntly. Val shrugged. "Most men are fools then. I judge by ability, not skirts or trousers." That surprised a small laugh from her. "The cattle need moving to the south pasture tomorrow. We start at dawn. If you prove useful, we can discuss longer terms." "Yes, madam." He nodded, then gestured to the fence she'd been fighting with. "Mind if I lend a hand with that now?" Penelope hesitated only briefly before handing him the hammer. "The bunkhouse is that way. It's empty, so take your pick of bunks." "Much obliged." Val took the tools and set to work with practiced efficiency. "One more thing, Miss Ellis, Penelope Ellis. Miss Ellis, I ride with a partner, older fellow named Hank Dutton. Best cook you'll find this side of the Mississippi, and he's looking for work too. Would that be acceptable?" Penelope considered this. A cook would be useful, especially during the coming drive. "If he's half as capable as you claim, bring him by, but I warn you I won't tolerate any disrespect or refusal to take my orders." Val's smile appeared then, transforming his serious face. "Trust me, Miss Ellis, Hank and I have worked for worse bosses than a capable woman trying to save her ranch." By the next afternoon, Penelope had to admit that Val hadn't exaggerated his skills. He moved among the cattle with silent authority, seeming to anticipate their movements before they knew them themselves. His partner, Hank, a grizzled man with a limp and colorful vocabulary, had arrived before dawn and immediately transformed the kitchen from a place of Penelope's culinary disasters to one producing mouth-watering meals. What Penelope hadn't expected was the subtle shift in her spirits. For the first time since her father's death, she felt a spark of genuine hope. Two men weren't enough to run the ranch properly, but it was a start. A week passed, then another. Word traveled that the Ellis Ranch was operational, and 3 more hands seeking work appeared, all vetted carefully by Val before Penelope even met them. They were a mixed lot. Young Tom Fresh from Tennessee, reliable Rodriguez who spoke little but worked tirelessly, and middle-aged Peterson, who'd been cowboying longer than Penelope had been alive. None questioned working for a woman after Val made it clear that disrespect wouldn't be tolerated. Penelope caught him once, speaking firmly to Tom when the young man had ignored her instructions in favor of doing things the right way. "Miss Ellis knows this ranch and these cattle," Val had said, his voice carrying to where Penelope stood unseen behind the barn. "You follow her orders same as you would any trail boss, or you can ride on." Tom had mumbled an apology and never questioned her again. The real test came when they needed to move the herd to the southern grazing lands. Harrington's men had blocked the direct route, claiming the passage belonged to their employer, though it had been common land for decades. "We could try the eastern approach," Peterson suggested during their evening meeting in the ranch house kitchen. Penelope shook her head. "Too long, and the cattle would lose condition on that poor grazing." "We could try reasoning with Harrington," Rodriguez offered, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it would work. "Or we could just go through," Val said quietly from his position leaning against the door frame. All eyes turned to him. "His men are armed," Tom pointed out nervously. "So are we." Val's gaze met Penelope's. "This is your ranch, your decision, but I've faced worse odds." Penelope studied the map spread across the kitchen table, the familiar territory of her childhood. "We'll go through at dawn," she decided. "Let's make preparations." That night, sleep eluded her. Standing at her bedroom window, she saw a lantern's glow from the barn and, curious, wrapped a shawl around her nightdress and slipped outside. She found Val meticulously cleaning and checking firearms, his movements precise in the lantern light. He looked up at her approach but didn't seem surprised. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Too much on my mind." She sat on a hay bale, drawing her shawl tighter against the night chill. "Are we making a mistake, Val? I won't ask men to die for my stubbornness." Val set aside the rifle he'd been working on. "This isn't stubbornness, it's your livelihood, your legacy." His eyes, serious in the golden light, met hers. but you should know Harrington visited me in town yesterday." Penelope felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "What did he want?" "Offered me twice what you're paying to convince you to sell. Said a pretty woman like you needed guidance, not cattle." Anger flashed through her. "And what did you tell him?" Val's smile was slow and dangerous. "I suggested he could guide himself straight to hell." The unexpected loyalty warmed something in Penelope's chest. "Why, you barely know me." He considered her for a long moment. "I know enough. I've seen how you are with the land, with the animals. How you treat your men fair and work alongside them." He paused. "My mother tried to save our ranch in Texas after my father died. No one would work for her, banks wouldn't extend credit. We lost everything." Understanding dawned. "So this is about your mother?" "No," he said simply. "This is about you, Penelope Ellis. Your strength deserves a fighting chance." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, or a possibility. Penelope found herself suddenly aware of his proximity, the breadth of his shoulders, the intensity in his eyes that saw her not as a fragile woman but as a worthy ally. "We should both get some rest," she said finally, rising. "Dawn comes early." Val nodded, returning to his task. "I'll be ready." The confrontation came as expected the next morning. Harrington's men, 8 of them, blocked the passage, their horses forming a line across the narrow trail. Penelope rode at the front of her small crew, the cattle bunched nervously behind them. "That's far enough, Miss Ellis," called the foreman, a burly man named Whitaker whom Penelope had known since childhood. She urged her horse forward. "This is common land, Mr. Whitaker. We're passing through with our cattle." "Mr. Harrington says different." Whitaker's hand rested meaningfully on his holstered pistol. "Turn back now." Val moved his horse up beside Penelope's, his presence solid and reassuring. "Seems to me," he said conversationally, "that Miss Ellis has as much right to this land as anyone. More, considering her family's been ranching here for 20 years. This isn't your fight, stranger," Whitaker warned. "I work for Miss Ellis. Her fights are my fights." Val's hand didn't move toward his weapon, but his readiness was evident in every line of his body. Penelope felt her men closing ranks behind her. Even young Tom sat straighter in his saddle, hand near his rifle. The realization that these men, virtual strangers a few weeks ago, were willing to stand with her against impossible odds, sent a surge of determination through her veins. "We're coming through, Mr. Whitaker," she said clearly. "I have no quarrel with you or your men personally, but I will not be bullied off land that is rightfully open to all ranchers in this territory." Tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. Penelope held her breath, painfully aware that a single wrong move could spark violence. Then, unexpectedly, riders appeared on the ridge above them, at least a dozen, led by a man Penelope recognized as Sheriff Taylor from town. "What's the meaning of this, Whitaker?" The sheriff called, guiding his horse down the slope. "Looks mighty like intimidation from where I'm standing." Whitaker shifted uncomfortably. "Just protecting Mr. Harrington's interests, Sheriff. On common land." The sheriff shook his head. "I've had complaints from 3 other ranchers about Harrington's men blocking access. This stops now." The arrival of the sheriff and his deputies, along with what appeared to be representatives from neighboring ranches, turned the tide. Whitaker, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, reluctantly ordered his men to stand down. As they moved aside, Val leaned toward Penelope. "Did you arrange this?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, genuinely surprised. "I had no idea the other ranchers would support me." "Maybe they respect strength when they see it," Val suggested, a note of admiration in his voice. The cattle drive proceeded without further incident, but word of the confrontation spread quickly. By the time they returned to the ranch 3 days later, Penelope found 2 more experienced hands waiting, hoping for work. It seemed standing up to Harrington had earned her unexpected respect in the territory. The weeks that followed brought gradual changes. The ranch operations smoothed out as their small crew established routines. Penelope still worked alongside her men, but increasingly found herself able to focus on the business aspects her father had taught her. The upcoming drive to Cheyenne would determine their financial future, and she pored over the ledgers late into many nights. It was during one such evening that Val found her asleep at her father's desk, head pillowed on account books. The gentle touch on her shoulder roused her, and she blinked up into his concerned face. "You're working yourself to exhaustion," he said softly, the lamplight casting shadows across his features. Penelope straightened, embarrassed to be caught drooling on the ledgers. "There's so much to organize before the drive, and it will still be there in the morning." His hand lingered on her shoulder, warm and steadying. "You need rest, Penelope." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in his tone made her heart quicken. She'd been increasingly aware of him over the past weeks, his competence, his quiet strength, the way his eyes followed her when he thought she wouldn't notice. "I keep thinking of everything that could go wrong," she admitted. "That's natural, but you're not alone in this." His gaze held hers. "I hope you know that." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Penelope found herself studying the strong lines of his face, wondering what it might be like to trace them with her fingers. The inappropriate thought startled her, and she stood abruptly, breaking the moment. "Thank you for the reminder," she said formally. "You're right, I should get some sleep." If Val was disappointed by her retreat, he didn't show it. He simply nodded and stepped back, respecting the boundary she'd established. "Good night, Miss Ellis." As the drive to Cheyenne approached, tensions with Harrington escalated. Two of their horses were found with cut fence wire wrapped around their legs, not fatal but clearly meant as a warning. A section of their grazing land mysteriously burned overnight. Small incidents, difficult to prove, were deliberate, but the message was clear. "He's getting desperate," Val observed as they rode the property line together. "Which means he sees you as a genuine threat now." Penelope surveyed the blackened grass. "I won't be intimidated, I know." There was that note of admiration again, "but we should be prepared for worse before the drive. He knows if you make it to market successfully, you'll have the funds to pay off the bank and secure your position." "What would you suggest?" "Night watches, and—" He hesitated. "I think you should consider carrying a sidearm." Penelope raised an eyebrow. "I can shoot, Val. I grew up on this ranch." "I don't doubt it." His smile was quick, but making it visible might discourage certain types of trouble. That evening, he presented her with a sleek Colt revolver with a custom grip sized for a smaller hand. "It was my mother's," he explained as she examined it. "She'd want you to have it." The gift touched her deeply, both for its practicality and the personal significance. "I'll take good care of it," she promised. 3 days before the scheduled drive, disaster struck. Penelope was awakened in the night by Hank pounding on her door, shouting that the barn was ablaze. She threw on clothes and rushed outside to find a scene of chaos. The main barn, where they stored their drive supplies and tack, was engulfed in flames that lit the night sky with hellish orange. The ranch hands had formed a bucket line from the well, but it was clearly too late to save the structure. Val directed efforts to keep the fire from spreading to nearby buildings, his face grim in the firelight. When he spotted Penelope, he strode to her side. "Everyone's accounted for. No injuries," he reported, "but we've lost most of the drive supplies." "Harrington," she said, the name bitter on her tongue. "Almost certainly, though we won't be able to prove it." His expression was thunderous. "This crosses a line, Penelope. Fire threatens more than property. It could have killed people." They worked through the night to contain the blaze. By dawn, only smoking ruins remained of the barn, and exhaustion had settled over the ranch. Penelope gathered her men in the kitchen, where Hank silently distributed coffee. "I understand if this changes things for any of you," she said, looking at their soot-streaked faces. "The drive is still possible, but harder now. If anyone wishes to leave, I'll pay what I can for your service thus far." The men exchanged glances. It was Peterson who spoke first. "Begging your pardon, Miss Ellis, but I didn't sign on because things were easy." Rodriguez nodded. "We finish what we start." One by one, they affirmed their commitment. Val said nothing, but the pride in his eyes as he watched her rally her crew spoke volumes. News of the fire spread quickly. By midday, unexpected help arrived. Women from neighboring ranches appeared with food and offers to help mend salvageable equipment. Ranchers who had stood with them against Whitaker sent spare tack and supplies. Even Mr. Porter from the Mercantile drove out with a wagon of necessities. offering credit until after the drive. "Never seen anything like it," Hank muttered as he organized the donations. Penelope was overwhelmed by the support. "Why are they helping us?" she asked Val as they sorted through the contributed gear. "Because you've shown them something worth supporting," he replied. "Courage doesn't go unnoticed in these parts, neither does injustice." That night, Penelope found Val alone by the corral, staring at the stars. She approached quietly, standing beside him in companionable silence before speaking. "I've been thinking about what happens after the drive," she said. He glanced at her, assuming it's successful, it will be. Her confidence wasn't bravado now, but certainty, "And afterward, I'd like you to stay as foreman if you're willing." Val turned to face her fully. "And if I wanted to stay for reasons beyond employment?" The directness of the question sent heat rising to her cheeks, but Penelope didn't look away. "What reasons would those be, Mr. Valero?" His smile was slow, his eyes never leaving hers. "I think you know, Miss Ellis," her heart hammered against her ribs. "It wouldn't be proper." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Is that what matters to you, or is it happiness?" "Both," she whispered. "But timing matters too. After the drive, after we've secured the ranch, then we can discuss other arrangements." Val nodded, accepting her terms. "I've waited this long, I can wait a little longer." The morning of the drive dawned clear and crisp. 300 head of cattle were gathered in the home pasture, ready for the 5-day journey to Cheyenne. Penelope's crew had swelled to 8 with the addition of 2 neighboring ranchers' sons, eager to gain experience and help thwart Harrington's attempts to crush a fellow rancher. Penelope rode among her men, her mother's revolver visible at her hip, giving final instructions. Val watched her with undisguised admiration as she confidently directed the operation, every inch a capable trail boss. They were an hour into the drive when riders appeared on the horizon. Penelope signaled a halt, and her crew moved protectively around the herd. Through her field glasses, she recognized Harrington himself leading at least 10 armed men. "They're coming to stop us," she told Val, who had ridden up beside her. "Let them try." His voice was deceptively calm, but his hand rested on his holster. Harrington's party approached to within 50 yards before stopping. The wealthy rancher rode forward alone, his expression thunderous. "This has gone far enough, Miss Ellis," he called. "You're taking those cattle nowhere." Penelope urged her horse forward to meet him. Val moved to follow, but she gestured for him to remain with the herd. This confrontation had been building since her father's death, and she would face it herself. "These cattle belong to the Ellis Ranch," she replied clearly, loud enough for all to hear. "We have every right to drive them to market. A woman has no business running cattle," Harrington sneered. "Your stubbornness has become tiresome. My patience is at an end." "Your patience?" Penelope's laugh held no humor. "You've cut my fences, intimidated my hands, burned my barn, and now you speak of patience. Prove it," Harrington challenged, though a flicker of unease crossed his face at her direct accusation. "I don't need to. Everyone here knows the truth." She straightened in her saddle. "Now stand aside, Mr. Harrington. We're driving these cattle to Cheyenne. I have 10 armed men who say differently, and I have the law." Sheriff Taylor's voice rang out as he and his deputies appeared from behind a nearby ridge, rifles ready. "Stand down, Harrington." "I've had enough of your harassment." Harrington's face contorted with rage. "This isn't your jurisdiction, Taylor. Actually, it is, and I've got witnesses to your threats just now. That's enough for me." The sheriff's expression was granite. "Miss Ellis is taking her cattle to market. You and your men will disperse or face arrest for obstruction and intimidation." For a tense moment, it seemed Harrington might defy the sheriff. Then, with a curse, he yanked his horse around. "This isn't over, Ellis," he spat before signaling his men to withdraw. Penelope waited until they were well away before returning to her crew. The men greeted her with newfound respect in their eyes. "That," said Peterson with a grin, "was something to see." Val said nothing, but as they resumed the drive, he rode close beside her. "You just faced down the most powerful man in the territory without flinching," he said quietly. "I don't think I've ever seen anything braver." "I was terrified," she admitted, "for his ears alone. That's what makes it courage." His gaze held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Ready to lead us to Cheyenne, boss?" The 5-day drive to Cheyenne tested them all. A sudden storm scattered part of the herd, requiring an exhausting roundup. A treacherous river crossing nearly cost them Rodriguez when his horse lost footing in the current. Through it all, Penelope led with unwavering determination, working alongside her men, making decisions that earned their increasing respect. Val remained her steady support, offering counsel when asked but never undermining her authority. Penelope found herself watching him with the men, his easy competence, his quiet leadership, the way he seemed to anticipate problems before they arose. Something deeper than professional admiration had taken root in her heart, though she kept it carefully guarded. When they finally reached Cheyenne, driving the cattle into the stockyards was a moment of triumph. The price was better than they dared hope, cattle being in high demand that season. After the sale was complete and the men paid, Penelope stood in the banker's office, watching as he counted out enough money to clear her father's debts with a healthy sum remaining. "Your father would be proud, Miss Ellis," the banker said as he handed over the bank draft. "Not many thought you could do it. Thank you." She tucked the precious paper safely away. "Will you be extending the same credit terms to the Ellis Ranch as you did when my father ran it?" The banker cleared his throat. "Well, now, that remains to be seen. A successful drive is one thing, but long-term operations, I'll take that as a no." Penelope smiled tightly. "Then I'll be moving our accounts to First Bank of Cheyenne. I understand they're more progressive in their thinking." She left the banker sputtering apologies and found Val waiting outside. Together they walked through the bustling streets of Cheyenne, a weight lifted from Penelope's shoulders for the first time in months. "So," Val said finally, "the ranch is secure, the men are paid, what happens now?" Penelope stopped, turning to face him in the golden afternoon light. "Now we can have that discussion about other arrangements." His eyes darkened. "I've been thinking about that." "Have you?" She was suddenly aware of her travel-worn appearance, her hair escaping its pins after days on the trail. "I have." Val took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "I think I've known since that night in the barn when you talked about your ranch with such passion. I've never met a woman with your kind of strength, Penelope." Her heart fluttered at the intensity in his gaze. "Most men find it off-putting. Most men are fools," he repeated his earlier assessment, making her smile. "I find it magnificent." The word hung between them, charged with meaning. Before she could respond, Val dropped suddenly to one knee there on the boardwalk, still holding her hand, oblivious to the curious glances of passers-by. "Vincent Valero, what are you doing?" she gasped, scandalized and thrilled in equal measure. "Honoring your strength in the only way I know how." His voice was rough with emotion. "Penelope Ellis, I've fallen in love with your courage, your determination, and everything else about you. I'm not a wealthy man, but I'm a hard worker, and I swear I'll spend my life helping you build your dreams. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Penelope's eyes, unexpected and unstoppable. This man, this extraordinary man, saw her not as a woman trying to do a man's job, but as a person whose strength he admired, who wanted to stand beside her, not in front of her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, I will." Val rose to his feet and, heedless of propriety or onlookers, pulled her into his arms and kissed her soundly. Penelope heard distant applause and laughter, but cared only for the man holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Later, as they celebrated with their crew at a local restaurant, Hank raised his glass in a toast. "To Miss Ellis," he said gruffly, "the strongest boss I've ever had, and to Val, who had the good sense to recognize it." "And fall to his knees before it," added Peterson with a wink, causing laughter to ripple around the table. Penelope, her hand securely in Val's beneath the table, had never felt more content. The road ahead would have challenges running the ranch, facing down continued opposition, building a life together, but for the first time, she truly believed in the possibility of happiness. The Ellis Ranch prospered in the years that followed. Penelope and Val were married in a simple ceremony on their land, with their loyal crew and newfound allies in attendance. Together they expanded operations, eventually becoming one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Harrington's power gradually waned as his underhanded tactics were exposed. The community that had rallied around Penelope continued to support her, and other women in the territory found inspiration in her example. Their first child, a daughter with her mother's honey-brown hair and her father's intense eyes, grew up on horseback, learning the business from both parents. By the time their son arrived 2 years later, the Ellis Valero Ranch was known throughout Wyoming not just for its fine cattle, but for the remarkable partnership at its heart. And though many eventually forgot the early days when a lone woman had defied convention and expectation, Val never did. Each anniversary, he would present his wife with a single wildflower, kneel before her, and remind her that her strength had been his salvation.